similar goals and components. Preventing homelessness, increasing the supply of affordable housing to prevent and remedy homelessness, delivering appropriate support services, and creating a management system that will track what's going on and evaluate how we're doing. It also focuses on this housing opportunity support team that we talked about before, and increasing availability and choices of permanent housing, and creating a community-wide partnership to implement this plan. So it's got an action plan that you can find on the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness website that consists of several documents. They go into painstaking detail about setting goals, objectives, measurement criteria, numerical targets, the whole 9 yards. And they've actually spent a lot of time sort of roughing this out with community advocates in the affordable housing world and in the advocates for homelessness and advocates for people with disabilities to make sure that everybody comes to an agreement on what these targets should be. And then they've got an equally painstakingly detailed plan about how we're going to get there through a management and governance structure creating a governance structure that's going to oversee how we're going to implement this plan, for creating different housing options through some very similar approaches that we talked about before in terms of streamlining and directing resources and refocusing them, and through this host action plan in terms of integrating how all of these nonprofits actually work together and eliminating duplication. So the 10-year plan for fiscal year 2012 also has housing that could potentially benefit the populations that the CSB serves. It includes 8 beds of permanent supportive housing with 24-hour care for singles, and which could either be a safe haven or a group home. And right now, there's a gap of 8 units between that plan and where we really stand. So basically, there's no project that's been committed yet. There are 24 beds of permanent supported housing with intensive supports through a project-based vouchers and a tax credit development that's being proposed, and another 14 continuum of care units. This plan is actually on target. Those resources have been secured. It's being executed. And there are 35 beds of permanent supported housing with moderate supports. Again, using the shelter, the Montauk shelter approach and bridging affordability units. This also has a few units that we're a bit short of. So basically, we recognize, the CSB recognizes that, there are a bunch of issues that we're still trying to tackle. We've got great plans, but most of the people that we serve still don't have high enough incomes to utilize the programs that are available. Our folks can't get on a housing wait list because they've been closed for so long. Some of the people that we work with just have rental histories that prevent them from being able to get into existing housing. And there's just a shortage of accessible, affordable housing, period. We at the CSB also realize that we have some of our own issues in terms of being able to make sure things are coordinated and we're getting where we need to go. One of them is that we don't really have a centralized waiting list for housing. We have like Trudy was mentioning, we have a waiting list for Stevenson Place, and we have a waiting list for this kind of housing and that kind of program and this kind of program, but there's no overarching waiting list. And we also have issues with housing and support services staying linked in our system, which means it gets hard to track the need for housing when everything's a program. So the issue becomes, well, wait, are we tracking the need for support services, or are we tracking the need for a place to live? It gets kind of very difficult to untangle the two when they're so intimately linked with one another. And the lack of affordable housing just frankly creates log jams in our service system. If we've got somebody waiting for an apartment, and right now they're sitting in a residential program like a group home, and they want to move to an apartment, but there aren't any apartments, that means they can't leave the group home, even if they're completely ready and they no longer need that level of service. And because they can't leave that group home, that means the person that's in the more intensive treatment facility can't leave that facility to go into the group home. So you can see sort of how it just keeps cascading and getting people stuck. So one of our plans is that we need to create a master housing list that really focuses on housing, not residential treatment, not programs. We need to know how many people that we serve need housing, need bricks and mortar, what kinds of bricks and mortar, and and how many of those types of units. We also need to know that's going to help us figure out how we're going to equitably distribute resources once we do get them, and how we're going to go about asking for those resources, what we're going to focus on, what we're going to prioritize. And it'll help us figure out how we're going to distribute those resources once we actually get them. The CSB is also very much an active participant in these implementation plans and evaluation plans for the blueprint and for the 10-year plan to end homelessness, so we can make sure that the folks that we serve, that their housing issues are on the radar screen at the top level, and their issues don't get lost in the shuffle. And one of our other focuses is to really reduce the amount of spending that the CSB or the amount of funding that the CSB is spending on housing, so that we can redirect that to services, so that we're able to provide more services for the people who need housing, so that we can continue to make sure that when people eventually do get housing, we're there to provide the supports that they need, rather than pay for the rent. We want to be able to reduce the amount of debt that the CSB is paying for the housing that's getting leased, so that it can be reinvested, and we can be able to serve more people by paying less debt and using that money to basically purchase or lease more housing. And we want to leverage the housing subsidies more effectively in small projects by using things like project-based vouchers and other kinds of housing grants. And then we want to maximize our waiting list enrollment and tracking, so that we can show that we're making progress, or if we're not making progress, why aren't we making progress? So we can make that point and try to find solutions. A couple of other things that we want to really focus on are redeveloping CSB properties that are owned by the Housing Authority, so that we can hopefully get those to serve more people. We can secure some vacant, unused county property and develop housing that's specific to people, the needs of people with disabilities. Partner with nonprofit developers so that we can leverage CSB and county resources. If we can create deals with nonprofits where we can say, hey, look, we'll let you take ownership of our land if you go out and you get the interest-free loan for this property, and you do the construction, and you operate the property, then that's less that we're paying and more that we're leveraging, so that the rents are going to be less over the long term. We're going to look at opportunities that come along for state funding that we can take advantage of to be able to create properties that are going to be very, very low, result in very, very low rents. And we're going to utilize the county's capital improvement process. In fact, that's one place where we're really working on trying to push the assisted living approach, is through our capital improvement plan, because that's really where we see being able to get the amount of funding that's going to be needed to create the amount of housing that's really going to be needed to cut down on that assisted living waiting list. And we think that there's a number of different approaches that can be used, whether it's a Stevenson Place model or smaller models, but that can perhaps be done on the same property, so that it can still serve the same number of people, but in a slightly different configuration, so that we can still meet everybody's needs and everybody's concerns about how the facility is, or how the physical plant is arranged. We want to establish a nonprofit organization that's separate from the CSB, so that it can help develop affordable housing. We want to be able to create enhance our capacity, so that when people actually say, hey, we would like to give you this housing, or we would like to participate in the development of your housing and we have some resource, but we don't know how to use it, we want to be able to help them be able to figure out how to do that. We have lots of families who would like to be able to participate in that development process, but they don't really have a vehicle or a mechanism to do that yet. And we want to seek opportunities to work with families who have resources and they want to create long-term housing. for their family members. Figure out how to take, leverage the resource that family members can bring privately with public resource to be able to expand opportunities.